It looks like Netflix may very well be the new owner of Warner Brothers in the near future, and I've got all the details on this possible blockbuster deal right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with a potentially massive story that broke late last night around 10 o'clock Central Time as I was preparing my review for Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which you were going to see in this slot. I think this story might be just a little bit more interesting. We've been covering here on the channel this bidding war that broke out to buy Warner Brothers Discovery or parts of Warner Brothers Discovery between Comcast, Paramount, and Netflix, and it appears that there is a winner in that war. Multiple sources reported late last night that Netflix has won over the board at Warner Brothers Discovery and will start a window of exclusive negotiations to buy the studio. While this does not mean that a sale is final or even imminent, it does mean that Netflix, for now, is the victor of this three-company bidding war, and they will now be the only potential buyer allowed to negotiate a deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. However, those talks could still result in a deal not being reached and the bidding process opening back up. Netflix, and this is kind of nebulous right now, reportedly offered about $28 a share for Warner Brothers in an 85% cash deal. Paramount Skydance is said to have offered $27 a share in an all-cash deal for the entire company, not just the assets that Netflix is interested in. As of late last night, no official details have been disclosed, but it seems clear that Paramount did not end up being, and perhaps never was, the preferred buyer for Warner Brothers Discovery's board and also for CEO David Zaslav. Unlike Paramount Skydance, Netflix's offer is not for all of Warner Brothers Discovery. They're interested in negotiating to buy the Warner Brothers Movie Studio and HBO Max. WB Discovery's cable networks will reportedly still be spun off into its own entity if this deal goes through, and perhaps still bought by somebody else, including Paramount Skydance. Bloomberg also reported that Netflix has put up a $5 billion breakup fee to be paid to Warner Brothers Discovery if this deal does not close. One major outstanding question, and one that we may not know the answer to for some time, is what Netflix's strategy regarding theatrical releases for Warner Brothers films is going to be. Thus far, Netflix is only committed reportedly to honoring existing contracts for theatrical release. However, unless Ted Sarandos has some kind of Ebenezer Scrooge moment, I don't see him all of a sudden embracing movie releases with full, robust theatrical windows. At best, I see Warner Brothers releases getting even shorter theatrical windows, and I think it's likely you can probably kiss physical media for WB movies goodbye as well. There are lots of points in this deal that are debatable, or this potential deal, but I think it's unquestionable that if it goes through, this will be something between a major setback and an absolute disaster for movie theaters and for movie fans like me who still enjoy seeing movies on the big screen. While this result would have been shocking a few months ago when word first began to spread that Paramount was interested in buying Warner Brothers, momentum has seemingly been shifting towards Netflix for the last couple of days, and no one seems to have been more aware of that than the head of Paramount, David Ellison. In the last week, Paramount has sent at least 2 letters directly to Warner Brothers Discovery to make a case against the company accepting Netflix's bid. The first letter, which was reportedly sent on Monday, laid out why a Netflix deal would be a mistake for the company due to regulatory issues with U.S. and world governments. The letter said, in part, quote, "While a proposed Paramount WBD transaction would be pro-competitive and likely have a favorable and relatively smooth approval process by regulators, a transaction with either Netflix or Comcast would face grave uncertainty and significant opposition by competition law enforcement agencies in the U.S. and abroad. Netflix, if combined with WBD, will reduce the number of films for broad theatrical release, further pushing consumers away from theaters to streaming and harming those theaters which are already struggling. Given that the co-CEO of Netflix has called brick-and-mortar movie theaters a, quote, outdated concept, Netflix ownership of WBD Studio would continue the trend toward more empty seats in theaters as Netflix shifts its movies away from initial runs in theaters. When combined with the number 4 player in the SVOD market, market, HBO Max. The resulting company would have a 43% share among global SVOD subscribers. This makes a deal presumptively illegal under U.S. law, which is even less restrictive than the laws in the myriad other jurisdictions that will evaluate the deal, end quote. Reports have emerged, however, that Warner Bros. Discovery is prepared to fight these anticipated regulatory issues and has been lawyering up for a protracted legal battle. So it didn't look like this strategy was going to work, and Paramount sent another letter to Warner Bros. Discovery that surfaced in reports just yesterday, demanding that the letter be shown to the company's board due to allegations of an unfair bidding process. That letter said in part, quote, "It has become increasingly clear through media reporting and otherwise that WBD," that means Warner Bros. Discovery, "appears to have abandoned the semblance and reality of a fair transaction process, thereby abdicating its duties to stockholders and embarked on a myopic process with the predetermined outcome that favors a single bidder." Several U.S. media outlets have reported on the enthusiasm by WBD management for a transaction with Netflix, and on statements by management that a transaction between WBD and Netflix would be a, quote, slam dunk, while also referring to Paramount's bid in a negative light. "We remain confident that the Paramount offer would provide the maximum value to WBD stockholders and look forward to the opportunity to continue to engage with you productively in this process. But at this point, we must insist on assurances and steps taken to ensure that a truly fair and independent process is being conducted, both for Paramount's benefit and in the interest of WBD's stockholders." In response, Warner Bros. Discovery basically said, no, we'll show them, but trust me, it's all above board. And David Ellison seems very salty that this deal has not gone his way. But you have to remember, he's the one who kicked off this whole process to begin with. Warner Bros. Discovery did not have any plans to sell until it had completed splitting into two companies next year. Ellison made several unsolicited offers, which inspired David Zaslav to then open the process up to other companies and use Paramount's enthusiasm to drive the sale price up far beyond what he likely would have gotten if he just sold to Paramount in the first place. David Ellison is very experienced in business, but he's very green as the head of a major Hollywood studio, and it appears that he assumed, wrongly, that he could just swoop in and take Warner Bros. Discovery by brute force. However, I think he was outmatched by Ted Sarandos over at Netflix and also by David Zaslav, who have been executives for years, and now Ellison faces the prospect of unintentionally playing a big part in creating an even bigger competitor for his own movie studio. So it's not shocking that he's looking to leverage regulatory issues and his family's government connections to try to kill any potential Netflix deal. The New York Post, which is regarded here in the U.S. as a right-leaning news source, to put it mildly, has made regulatory issues the primary focus of the paper's coverage of this deal and has also reported statements from government officials signaling that the Trump administration would not fight a Paramount-Warner Brothers deal. In just the last week, the Post has reported that White House officials were preemptively concerned about a Netflix bid's anti-competitive nature, that government sources have said that a Netflix-Warner Brothers merger would face a multi-year legal battle, and that Ellison himself had visited Washington just in the last couple days to speak directly to Trump administration officials and explain why a Netflix acquisition should be rejected by government regulators. But it seems that David Zaslav and Netflix were not going to fall victim to this war of words in the press. They're aware of the fight, and they appear ready to face it. Now, in reading all of this coverage over the past few days, it sounds to me like David Ellison realized he was losing this bidding war, then complained that the game wasn't fair and ran to the grown-ups to tell on his competitors. I'm not saying that a Netflix-Warner Brothers merger isn't anti-competitive. I think that any of these mergers would have been anti-competitive, and I think that they're all bad for the entertainment industry. But Ellison is not afraid to use his family's ties to the government as a weapon to get his way, and some officials have already begun lobbying the Department of Justice to deny a Netflix purchase of Warner Brothers. Back on November 14th, before this really started to heat up, California Representative Darrell Issa, a Republican and close ally of the president's, wrote a letter to government officials saying in part, quote, "As you are aware, Netflix is already the dominant streaming platform in the United States, and permitting it to absorb a major competitor raises antitrust concerns that could result in a harm to consumers. With more than 300 million global subscribers and a vast content library, Netflix currently wields unequaled market power. Adding both HBO Max's subscribers and Warner Bros. Premier content rights would further enhance this position, reportedly pushing the combined entity above a 30% share of the streaming market, a threshold traditionally viewed as presumptively problematic under antitrust law. A further concern is that this consolidation would also diminish incentives to produce new content and major theatrical releases, evidenced by Netflix's own statements dismissing movie theaters as, quote, outdated, which could undermine opportunities for the full range of industry professionals, both in front of and behind the camera, end quote. While Issa has been an ally to the entertainment industry in the past, I think it is going to be very interesting to see how many politicians who may have openly wished for the destruction of Hollywood in public for the last several years are about to become fierce advocates for the theatrical experience in opposition to Netflix. Also, Issa isn't wrong here in that letter. But if the government is just now getting worried about anti-competitiveness in Hollywood, then I think they're a little bit late to the party. I think this potential deal should be given heavy regulatory oversight because I think that it is legitimately anti-competitive. However, I think it will get scrutinized in order to try to tip the scale towards Paramount, especially if this deal falls through, who would not get the same level of scrutiny. And that isn't right. However, politicians and the Ellisons are not the only ones who are lobbying against a potential Netflix deal. Perhaps sensing that this was coming, a group of film producers sent an email to members of both political parties in the U.S. asking them to oppose the deal or a potential deal and to give this acquisition, quote, the highest level of scrutiny, unquote. Variety, who reported the existence of this email, cited sources saying that the group included a number of prominent filmmakers, though the email itself was unsigned as the filmmakers reportedly feared retribution from Netflix given the company's size. Perhaps it's about to get even bigger. The rationale behind opposition to this deal from these filmmakers was that a Netflix merger would, quote, effectively hold a noose around the theatrical marketplace, end quote, and Variety's reporting stated that one Netflix strategy would involve theatrical windows for Warner Bros. Films as short as 2 weeks, though other sources disputed that claim, saying that the window would be longer than that. So we have a growing list of opponents to this deal, and if its number one opponent, David Ellison, is looking for allies, he doesn't really have to lobby the White House to gain their support. He has openly had that support from the beginning, and unless something major changes, Netflix is almost certainly facing an uphill regulatory battle against an administration that will likely try everything it can to torpedo this deal. In other words, strap in, folks, because this is going to get ugly. One legal strategy that Netflix and Warner Bros. Discovery are reportedly going to employ is a claim that streaming also includes YouTube, where we are right now, and that YouTube, with its massive market share, is actually the company's biggest competitor for views, making a combined Netflix-Warner Bros. Simply a large company built to compete in the streaming world with Google, not just other studios and streamers. There are arguments here that can be made for both sides. YouTube and Netflix are statistically very competitive when it comes to time spent on each platform, and YouTube is Netflix's biggest competition for eyeballs, but past Netflix statements regarding YouTube, when downplaying the competition for investors to help keep the stock price up, may hurt them. Executives in the past have often told investors that while they are competitive as far as watch time, Netflix differentiates itself with more high-value content and that the two services actually feed off of one another. If Warner Bros. And Netflix do come to deal terms, you can expect YouTube to be a centerpiece in the legal fight over this merger. Speaking of past statements coming back to haunt you, Variety included a footnote in one of its articles in the coverage about this deal that I actually thought was pretty funny. Back in 2010, just 3 years after Netflix launched its streaming service and as that service was gaining momentum, then CEO of Time Warner, which at that time owned Warner Brothers, Jeffrey L. Bukes, was asked if Netflix was a threat to the established studio structure. And he said, quote, "It's a little bit like Is the Albanian army going to take over the world? I don't think so. At $8 to $10 per month, Netflix doesn't have the economics to support high-value programming. Well, it now appears very likely, or at least somewhat likely, that the Albanian army that is Netflix will soon be supporting Warner Brothers' high-value programming, but there is a long road to travel between here and there, and of course, I will be right here keeping my eye on that long road and covering all of the major developments. We are at step one of what is going to be a multi-month, perhaps multi-year process, and that's if Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery can actually come to terms. If they can't, well, then we're right back to step one. But this is still a major story, and I'm glad that I was up and alert last night to be able to bring it to you this morning. Be sure to stay tuned right here for any more major updates and also the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. As I mentioned, I did go see Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which is what I was prepping when this story broke, so I stopped prepping that review. I may upload that later today or perhaps tomorrow because I don't want to have sat through that movie for nothing. So you can probably look for that here on the channel very soon, and I've always gotten my ear to the ground for something that I think might be fun. Thank you so much for listening to this, as we call them, broccoli update about a potential really industry-changing merger that could be in the works. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.